All right, welcome back. This is now part 4 on our series on ancient Greece, and in this lecture we're going to be talking about Alexander the Great, his rise, his conquests, and his eventual demise. So I don't know if you remember, but at the end of our last lecture we had talked about the effects of the Peloponnesian War and how the Spartan League, the Peloponnesian League, Sparta and her allies, had been able to gain a victory over Athens and her allies. But at the end of the war, the Spartans are not really interested in fighting or, let's say, maintaining control of all of Greece. They just want to go home. They want to be left alone, and they don't want there to be any other threats in their backyard. But they're not really interested in being part of history writ large, as far as there's going to be a Spartan empire or anything like that. That's not something that they're interested in. They want to stay on their peninsula and be left alone. But if you go to the north, one of Sparta's main allies, which is Macedonia, you have this kingdom up here that's led now by Philip II, and Philip II has ambitions that are beyond this. And because he was on the winning side, his kingdom is on the winning side. That means that he's been strengthened by this. And like I had said in the last lecture, the Macedonians were kind of thought of as close to barbarians. I mean, basically, as un-Greek as you can get and still be Greek. They wore animal skins. The dialect that they spoke was considered to be improper and unsophisticated. The rest of the Greeks really kind of looked down on them. And another thing I believe I said in the last lecture is that the Thracians were also barely Greeks. I guess I misspoke on that because the Thracians were just flat out not Greeks. They had been conquered by Philip II, which means that Macedonia is already an empire. They're already ruling over people who are they're culturally and linguistically different from themselves. Philip II, after kind of expanding the borders of his kingdom, his empire, has a son whose name is Alexander. And this is Alexander III. He's going to eventually be Alexander the Great. Several stories take place early in Alexander's life that are supposed to set him apart. He's supposedly a descendant of Heracles, which would be the name of Hercules on his dad's side. And then on his mom's side, he's supposedly the descendant of Achilles. His mom is not Macedonian, which means that he's only half Macedonian. And so a lot of the people of Macedonia, they are reluctant to accept his authority. But like I said, these stories of divine descent and then also some other legends help to make them more accepting of his rule. Another one is this ability that he has supposedly in his young age to tame an untamable horse. Or there's another interesting story where he goes to a temple where offerings are being made to the gods, and you're supposed to just take a pinch of incense and throw it on the fire as an offering to the gods, but instead he just thrusts both of his hands into the bowl of incense and grabs 2 giant fistfuls and throws them on the fire, and the priests get mad at him, basically talking about how expensive this stuff is and say that's wasteful. And Alexander says, look, if you had given the gods due respect, then they would have given you greater blessings. So another legend that comes later is that once he has conquered large swaths of the rest of the world, he sends what we would call truckloads of this incense back to the temple that he had done this in. He sits under the tutor Aristotle, which is considered by many to be the greatest philosopher to have ever lived. There's a lot of things about his younger life that set him up for success. And then when his father dies, Alexander's only 18, and he's seen combat before. Even when he was 16, his father was away trying to fight a battle, and he left the kingdom in the care of Alexander, and Alexander was able to put down a Thracian revolt, a Thracian uprising. And now he ascends to the throne at the young age of 18, and he has at his disposal this army, and to the south of Macedonia we have this League of Corinth, where almost all of the rest of Greece, with a few noteworthy exceptions, has been united by Philip II. And you'll see that Sparta down there, they're not interested in being part of the League of Corinth. Like I said, they just want to be left alone. And so Alexander takes this league and he takes this army and he points it east toward the Persian Empire, which is at this point ruled by King Darius III. The Persian Empire has been a thorn in the side of Greece, or the Persians would say that the Greeks have been a thorn in their side. But regardless, there has been great fighting and struggle and power games being played between the Greeks and the Persians for over a century at this point. And so Alexander's desire is to deal with the Persian problem once and for all. Let's take a look at his army to see kind of how he does this. There are a lot of different factors that contribute toward the success of Alexander's military. Most notably, I would say, is this guy over here on the left. He is wielding a giant spear that's called a sarissa. A sarissa would be anywhere from 18 to 21 feet long, and you think, okay, how can this guy even wield that? And the answer is he can't as an individual, but the men who are behind him are helping him to stabilize and to direct his spear. And so if you think of the phalanx formation, that's already been a staple of the Greek military, or really the substance of the Greek military. You take their spears and you just make them twice as long, and as a result you can hold the enemy further away from you, or you can present danger to them at twice the distance. Alexander also uses cavalry and archery, which the Greeks had not really done. They thought of those things as cowardly and as not really something that a true man should do. If you wanted to kill someone, you needed to get up close and personal, get his blood in your teeth, so to speak. Archery was considered cowardly and not something that you should do. You should fight nobly and put your own life on the line. However, the Greek archers, and especially the Greek cavalry, become crucial and critical in a lot of the major military victories because of the speed and the power that they bring in. Alexander also orders his army to replace the heavy bronze armor with this much lighter armor that's actually made from layers of linen and glue that have been laid over each other. And it's surprisingly strong. It's also lightweight, and in the heat of the Persian sun, it's going to help to cool them off a lot more than basically wearing a giant metal shield over your chest. But pretty good at stopping implements of war as well. He uses siege weapons, catapults, battering rams, and the like. Another big thing that you see here at the bottom is Alexander's emphasis on supply lines. Alexander made it a point to stay connected at all times to the homeland, either by land or by sea, so that he could have fresh troops, fresh food, fresh weapons when needed, constantly being supplied to his military. So no matter how far away they got from the homeland, they would always be supplied with basically brand new equipment and supplies. And another thing with those supply lines is that a lot of militaries would use horses to pull their supply carts, and then those same horses would be used in battle. Alexander swaps out the horses for oxen so that the horses can be kept fresh for battle and used as an effective cavalry unit. The biggest contributor, or one of the biggest contributors, I should say, is this over here on the bottom right. You see that Alexander himself would lead his troops into battle. He wouldn't, a lot of kings would either sit back with their entourage, their bodyguard, and give directions from there, perhaps up on a hill where they would be able to see the whole scope of the battle and use flags to direct different wings and flanks of their military. Alexander was on the front lines himself, mounted and charging into battle, putting his own skin in the game, famously calling the individual names of men in his military and, yelling at them like, hey, be brave, don't lose heart, fight valiantly. And this caused the people to just love him. They were in love with this guy. They would have, and many of them did, give their lives for him because they thought of him as a worthy leader, not just some rich guy who, they were being paid to fight for. They were actually loyal to him. So with this military and with the League of Corinth at his side, which is, like I said, pretty much the combined forces of almost all the rest of the Greek city-states, he points this army to the east, and he begins his invasion of Persia. And I have this map up here in the top, different areas that we'll move through over the course of looking at his conquest. So famously, he crosses over into Asia Minor. He's officially in enemy territory, and the Persians burn several of the cities and retreat from those cities, their own cities, because the idea is that usually militaries would devour what they conquered. So an army would march to a city, and then they would live off of the supplies and food that had been stored in that city while they prepared for their next battle. This doesn't really hurt Alexander, however, because of his supply lines, because he is still connected to the homeland. And so he leads his army against the Persian army for the first time at the Battle of Granicus, and he gains a victory over them. stunning victory, even outnumbered, even being the away team. He's able to check them off of his list, and then also he moves throughout Asia Minor, and sometimes by displays of strength, and sometimes by other maybe let's say more propaganda means. He gains legitimacy in a lot of these different areas around Asia Minor. Famously in the city of Gordium, there's a prophecy. They have this giant knot that had been tied by a holy man, very large, very complex, and the prophecy was that any man who could untie the Gordian knot would be the rightful ruler of Gordium. And Alexander takes a look at it, decides that he's not able to untie it, draws his sword, and just cuts clean through the thing, and basically says, okay, it is no longer tied, which means that I'm your rightful ruler. And perhaps because of this, perhaps because of his displays of strength and competence earlier on, he is able to, lay claim to being the true ruler of Gordium, and the people follow after him. Next major battle is further east on the peninsula of Asia Minor, and is called the Battle of Issus. This is where the Macedonian troops, the Greek troops, engage Persia directly, and Darius III is actually present at this battle, and the Greeks are able to defeat the Persians, even their elite units, which are called the Persian Immortals. They are called Immortals because for everyone that's killed on the battlefield, supposedly a reserve infantryman or a reserve immortal was thrown into battle, so it would never seem to the enemy that their number was being depleted. Even if, as you killed more people, more of them would show up, and you would just feel like you're not making any progress. But famously, at the end of this battle, Darius III flees. He runs away. Rather than facing Alexander directly, he flees back home to his capital cities, and he leaves his mother, his wife, and 3 of his children here. And perhaps because of this, his mother actually disowns him, and eventually will come to informally adopt Alexander the Great as her son, which is a claim that he's going to be able to make to being the true ruler over all of the lands of the Persian Empire. So with that done, Alexander has a decision that he has to make. Okay, so I can either go straight to the Persian capital, and I could, try to, or capitals. They have 3 capitals: Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis. I can either go straight to the Persian capitals, and I can take them on directly. But if I do that, there are these lands over here in the Levant, Syria, Egypt, what today would be Israel, and if I leave these people unconquered, then they can use their navy to disrupt my navy and basically to make problems for me back at home. And so instead of going directly to the east toward the capitals of Persia, he instead turns south and west to Syria and Israel and Egypt. And this is a detour that takes a lot of time. It takes years out of his schedule, but he sees this as being a necessary step in order to make sure that no problems are caused for him while he goes for the neck, while he goes for the kill of the actual Persian capitals themselves. So he moves a little bit further south, and he encounters the city of Tyre. Tyre is an island city, and because of that, they have a incredible navy, and they're considered undefeatable, at least by sea. And Alexander's not really great at fighting by sea. That's not really his forte. He much prefers to fight on land. And the sea is basically just something that he uses to resupply his troops. He would keep his fleet sending fresh supplies. If you were to trace the southern edge of Asia Minor, that's how his troops would be being supplied. And the Tyrans, the inhabitants of this city, they mock Alexander and talk about how they have all the provisions that they need for years and years to come, and the navy that they have would defend them to the death, and they're undefeatable. And Alexander, again, he kind of takes a look at the problem, and he decides that rather than trying to solve this problem with his navy, he'll try to solve this problem with his engineers. And he starts having his engineers and his army construct a land bridge. So the island of Tyre is about a mile off of the coast of the Mediterranean, off of the coast of the mainland there. And he just basically has his men start building a land bridge out of stone and earth with a wall of siege towers in the front of it, so they can't be shot at, can't really be affected by the navy either, and they turn the island of Tyre into a peninsula. And then once this island has been turned into a peninsula, he marches his army across the causeway, and he takes the city of Tyre, and he's merciless with them, because to him this has been a huge waste of his time. They should have just bowed the knee and submitted to him, but instead they had just kind of held their land like cowards and refused to come up to him. So Alexander's furious with them, and he makes it known. And apparently that makes an impression, because the next two places that he takes, he doesn't really even have to engage in combat. He goes further south to the city of Jerusalem, and famously, when he gets to the city of Jerusalem, the priests of the tribe of Judah, they welcome him, and they bring him into the temple of Solomon, and they show him prophecies from the book of Daniel, prophecies about the Medes and the Persians, the empire of the Persians being overthrown by a great four-headed leopard with wings, and the idea of the silver chest and arms of the statue of Nebuchadnezzar, from the dream of Nebuchadnezzar rather, giving way to the bronze loins, which would be the hips and the legs. And they say, this is you. We believe that you are the true deliverer who is here to set up your kingdom over us, and to not to dispel the Persians, and to chase the Persians out. So they call him a deliverer that's been sent to them by God. Alexander accepts this, and basically just moves on. And so the last place that he has left in his detour is Egypt. And again, when the Egyptians find him, they welcome him in, and they declare him not only the official ruler over Egypt, but they actually declare him the Pharaoh over Egypt. And they say not only that he is a deliverer sent by the gods, but they say that he is a descendant of the gods. And it's actually at this point, so he builds a new city in Egypt called Alexandria. He does that a lot, building cities and naming them after himself. But it's at this point that his own men start to kind of give him a look where it's like, hey, you're kind of getting high on your own supply over here. You are doing things that I don't think you should be doing if you're a Greek. Like, you're accepting these titles of being, the Pharaoh of Egypt. Like, we're not your slaves. We're not your subjects. If you were an Athenian or a Theban or a Corinthian that was fighting in Alexander's army, you thought of yourself as a free agent. You followed him because you respected him. You followed him because you wanted to follow him. You didn't fight for him because he was your, authoritarian ruler and he would crush you if you didn't. You consider yourself a free man. And now you have these people that are naming him to be the Son of God, to be sent by the gods, and he's starting to believe this, and he's even starting to do some other things that are kind of Eastern and Persian and not really Greek. And remember, a lot of these Greeks, they think of the Macedonians as barely being Greeks anyway. But this establishment of Alexander's control over Egypt is going to pave the way for that Ptolemaic dynasty that we had talked about, which concludes with Cleopatra. That's not going to come for hundreds of years in the future. But just note the fact that his own military is starting to give him a side eye and say, like, hey, we're watching you. We just don't want you to become too Persian. We don't want you to become too unlike us free Greeks. With all of these places conquered and out of the way, all of the western regions of the Persian Empire out of the way, he goes for Babylon in the Battle of Gargamella. In this battle, Darius, before he even comes to the battle, he sends an emissary, and he sends an emissary of ambassadors to Alexander, and he says, look, I want peace. All of these western places that you've taken, Asia Minor, Syria, the Levant, Egypt, you can have them. You can have half of my kingdom. I'll give you my own daughter as your bride. I'll give you a massive gift of gold. Just leave me alone, okay? All I want is peace. And Alexander does not respect this. He basically thinks, okay, you should be fighting me like a man. You should be putting your own life on the line. And with this, again, Darius leads his army, now not just his immortals, not just the Persian military, but pulling on troops from all over the empire, infantrymen from Babylon, horseback archers from the Medes, even war elephants, just all of these different units from all over the empire that he has left, he has pointed toward Alexander, and it still doesn't matter. Even though he has Alexander massively outnumbered, Alexander is able to lead his military to victory, and yet again, Darius III runs away. Rather than fighting Alexander directly, he runs away. He runs to the city of Persepolis. Eventually, he runs north from Persepolis to the city of Ecbatana. But the Babylonians, when they see the results of this, they welcome Alexander. They name him their true king. Both the people of Babylon and the other capital city of Susa, a little bit further to the east, they name him as their rightful ruler. Think of this: the Babylonians are not Persians. Remember, the Babylonians are a Semitic people. So just like the Egyptians, just like the Judeans, the people of Israel, just like the people of Asia Minor, they consider themselves to already be living under a foreign ruler who's established their empire over them. Alexander might be a better ruler, so he might be someone who will, rule them perhaps with a lighter touch. They don't know this, but they're not specifically loyal to Darius in the same way that a Persian would be. So Darius runs away, and Alexander pursues him to the city of Persepolis, the original capital of the Persian Empire. And when he gets there, he doesn't give them the option of submitting. He burns down the entire capital city, just out of frustration first of all, as payback for the fact that the Persians had destroyed cities in Greece, including Athens, during the Greco-Persian War. But also as a sign of, like, look, your own king has abandoned you, and if your king has abandoned you, then perhaps your god, Ahura Mazda, that you believe to be the only true god, has abandoned you as well. He burns the city of Persepolis with fire. Darius has already run away north to the city of Ecbatana, and so Alexander turns his army north to pursue Darius. Unfortunately, before he gets there, one of Darius's own generals, a man named Bessus, winds up killing Darius III. So Bessus, this general of the Persian military, claims to be the true king of Persia. Now, I don't know exactly what he's claiming to be king of, because Persepolis, the capital city, has been burned to the ground. Babylon and Susa, the other two capital cities, have accepted Alexander as their true king, and all of these other places to the west, the western provinces, have already been either conquered by Alexander, or they have accepted Alexander willingly, without a fight, as the king of Egypt. I'm sorry, of the western provinces, so Egypt and Israel and Asia Minor. So essentially, if he's claiming to be the king of anything, he's claiming to be the king of this large, open, desert and grassland region that lays to the east between Persia city, Persepolis, and India. So Alexander chases this military down. He chases them into the desert to the east, the land of Sogdiana and Bactria, and the legend would say that while his military is in the desert, they become disconnected from their supply lines, and ravens bring bread and food to his military. Again, almost certainly a legend. I can't imagine that actually being true. I'm not opposed to miracles happening, but this is just not, the context that I would expect them to happen in. And he chases down Bessus and kills him. And so now there's no one left to claim to be the king of Persia except for himself. However, here's the thing. When Alexander gets all the way to the eastern part of the Persian Empire, he looks to the east and he sees that there is more world to conquer. Okay? This might be an exaggeration, but in the Greek mind, Persia was just the eastern part of the world. Okay? They knew that there were other kingdoms that were to the west, up in Europe and down in Africa, but Persia was just Asia to these people. So to have conquered the Persian Empire, to look east and to see that there are other now Indian kingdoms that are up for grabs, Alexander desires not just to conquer the Persian Empire, but to conquer the world. And so he leads his military in battles. He crosses the Ganges River, and he crosses the Indus River, the Hydaspes. He engages the Indian military, and he winds up defeating them. I mentioned this in a previous lecture on India. He actually destabilizes India by these fighting campaigns, to the point that Asoka is able to rise up what we call the Mauryan dynasty in India today. So his troops have been successful, and Alexander wants to keep leading them further and further into the heart of India and conquer India as well. But his troops look at him and say, dude, we have been away from our families, away from our wives and our children for 10 years. We have done nothing except win, win, win under you. And that's great, but we're kind of tired of winning. We want to go home. We want to spend time with our families. We're not saying that you can't do anything. You're young. Alexander at this point is barely over 30 years old. So in about a decade, he has conquered everything from Greece all the way to India. The whole Persian Empire is his. And Alexander originally tells them no, but they threaten to revolt against him, and he concedes and he turns his way to the west and he starts marching them back home. His plan, interestingly enough, is to go home and then to plan a campaign where he would conquer Arabia, but that doesn't quite happen. He marches his army west, and I've talked about this before. This is where he's going to die. He's going to die in the city of Babylon. Talked about this before. His troops have already started to kind of lose, I don't want to say lose respect for him, but they've started to get suspicious about him because he's beginning to adopt a lot of Persian practices that the Greeks flat out do not respect. They do not respect Persian culture. They think of it as being feminine and decadent and not proper for a man who calls himself a Greek, regardless of if he's a Macedonian or not. But he starts to dress like a Persian. The Greeks were monogamous people, and Alexander has been taking multiple wives throughout this campaign to try to set up spheres of legitimacy. Another big thing that he does is he starts to have the different rulers, the different satraps that have been in charge of these places bow to him, and Greeks did not bow. The idea was not that you were a god or a lord over these people that they had to submit to. Again, the Greeks thought of themselves as free men, as voluntary agents who were here because they wanted to be here. But as Alexander has become more and more Eastern, more and more Persian, they have lost a good amount of respect for him, and so he has to put down all of these rebellions on this march between India and Babylon. He sees several of his own viceroys and generals who have started to do things that he considers problematic, and he has a lot of them killed. Famously, he also marries 80 of his generals to Persians. He forces them to marry Persians so that they would bear children that are a blend of Greek blood and Persian blood, and that those people would be loyal to him alone. So he forces all of these marriages, and like I said, this despotism, this idea of basically ruling like a tyrant, the Greeks, some of them began to think like, how is this better than if the Persians had conquered us? Okay, if the Persians had conquered us, then all of this land and Macedonia and Greece, so all of the Persian Empire and Greece would be united, and they would have someone in charge who charges tribute and who is culturally Persian and is behaving himself in a way that the Persians would. It would just be an actual Persian. Now we have a guy who's half Macedonian, and he is doing the same things. He's behaving like an Easterner. He's behaving like one of these decadent Persians, and so they lose a lot of respect for him now. In the partying that ensues, the victory parades that are being thrown in Babylon, Alexander dies. The official narrative is that he has a particularly high fever, and he just dies in the night. Some people think that this might be malaria that he caught while he was in India and had been having to fight against all the way over here. So that's the official narrative, is that it was a fever. A lot of people resist that because it just does not seem to be a proper end for one of the greatest conquerors in all of human history. So some people would say that it was either alcohol poisoning from all of the partying that he had been doing, or perhaps some assassin had poisoned him because of the resentment that the Greeks had against him. Either way, Alexander the Great dies in the city of Babylon, and that leaves a massive power vacuum, because now you have Greeks, Persians, Egyptians, all of these different types of people, Babylonians, even some Indians, who are the part of this empire that now has no head. And even though Alexander had several wives, he had not really taken it upon himself to set up a clear heir to his throne. And so in the time after that, several of his generals vie for power, and his empire gets split into all of these pieces. We see Ptolemy down here taking control of Egypt. We see Cassander, who takes control of Macedonia and Greece, basically Macedonia and the League of Corinth. We have Lysimachus, who takes control of Thrace and parts of western Asia Minor, and then Seleucus, who winds up taking control of the largest part of the Persian Empire. Largest, wealthiest, most substantial part of the empire goes to him. And even though this is the end of Alexander's life, his legacy definitely winds up living on. After Alexander's death, these Seleucids wind up calling themselves the Seleucid Persian Empire. However, both in the former Persian Empire and in Greece, there starts to be this intermixing of the cultures, where there are certain Persian ideas, philosophies, even aesthetics, that start to blend and bleed into Greek culture. And similarly, a lot of Greek ideas and aesthetics and philosophies start to go into Persian culture. We see this, I've mentioned this before, how over close to India and what wind up becoming known as the Greco-Bactrian kingdoms, you have this style of sculpture where you have this Buddha. So Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, is being carved and sculpted in a similar way to the way that the Greeks would have sculpted their gods and goddesses. The Greek language spreads throughout all these different parts of the Persian Empire, so much so that we see coins in India with their king's name written on them in Greek, using Greek letters, using the Greek alphabet. Greek architecture, the Greek concept of the council form of government also starts to spread between these things. So Greek culture is influencing Persia in a similar way to the way that I think of American culture and philosophy and political ideas kind of bleeding into the rest of the world. In my time outside of the country, I've noticed that it's our movies that are watched in a lot of places. Not to say that nobody else produces movies, obviously, but when movies make it big in America, they wind up making it big all around the world. Our food, for better or worse, has also become popularized and has also, set up franchises, and they've gotten into the markets of different places around the world. Even the idea of the congressional system or the constitutional system running a government has spread a lot over the course of America's time as an empire. If you want to call it an empire, I think I would call it an empire. But so in the same way that American ideas have bled into the rest of the world, even though it's not necessarily out-and-out conquest, Greek ideas started to bleed into the Persian Empire, and Persian ideas started to bleed into the Greek Empire, or into Greece, let's say. So much so that Alexander becomes the dividing line in Greek history between what we call Hellenic Greek history and Hellenistic Greek history. Hellenes are what the Greeks call themselves, and so Hellenic you can just think of as being Greek, and I like to think of Hellenistic as being Greekish, right? So Greekish, you could be Greek, but you're going to be influenced by other things, or you might be, predominantly Egyptian or predominantly Persian or Babylonian, but you definitely have a flavor of Greek culture that's bled into your own. So in the same way, we see aesthetics that come from all around the world come into America, just like American ideas go to other places. Products and art, culture from around the world go to America. This is also really notable in cuisine. Not only have McDonald's has been set up all around the world, but also other types of cuisine have come to America. These are just examples of kind of cultural fusion. And a lot of people think of this as the end of classical Greece. Like, Greece is never going to be purely Greek anymore. That Spartan, Athenian, phalanx, that democracy type of idea is not going to be the same going forward, because it has been touched by all of these foreign ideas and foreign influences. And so we'll talk about that in a couple of later lectures. We'll even talk about philosophy and how philosophy before Alexander, Hellenic philosophy, is distinct from philosophy that happens after Alexander. But we'll save those things for future lectures. Thank you so much for watching. Appreciate you being with me. Hope you have a blessed day.